My Personal Reflection, Chapters 1 through 5, by Tiana Mayer. We're doing this personal reflection to tell you what topics through chapters 1 through 5 have impacted and affected the way we think or behave. So I'll be going through each chapter and highlighting what subject impacted me the most and what I learned from them and why I think it's important. So, Chapter 1. Chapter 1 was kind of an review of what ethics are and, ethics in the business world. But I really took away the decision making process. And it might be because we had to use them in forums. But when you do the decision making process, it includes developing a problem statement, identifying the alternatives, choosing an alternative, implementing the decision, and evaluating the results. So, before learning this process, I can't tell you really how I made a decision. But I think now that I've learned this process, it's changed the way I looked at every problem. Um, we used it in forums, and I think that really helped drive it into my head on how to use it. So I think that just impacted me the most out of this chapter. Chapter 2. So, Chapter 2 talked a lot about certifications. Um, and I never put a lot of weight into certifications. I knew we got them through our degree, but I never thought much about them. And then after reading this chapter, I guess it made me realize how important they were, especially when there was one kid, I believe in this class, that said, he didn't put a lot of weight into certifications because his resume already looked good. Well, my resume is all customer service. I mean, I don't have anything IT on my resume other than the fact that I'm going for software development. So to have these certifications for me is going to change a lot. It's going to make my resume look better. It's going to show that I do have knowledge in this field. And that changed my outlook on a lot of stuff. I mean, if it wasn't for these certifications, I would go in and they'd be like, well, you know nothing. So this chapter just emphasized on how important certifications were. I believe it was you that also mentioned that, some employers will pay to get you certified later in life. And I thought that was really cool because I didn't know that was a thing. I didn't know that employers would be like, hey, we need this, so let's pay to get you certified in it. And I thought that was a really cool thing to learn. So, chapter 3 was a big one for me. I always liked cybersecurity. I had a really hard time choosing between cybersecurity and software development and choosing what I wanted to study. And this chapter kind of made me realize that I really liked cybersecurity more than what I originally thought. And it might be what I want to learn next. My favorite part in this chapter is the computer forensics. It really interested me before. It did. But after reading this chapter, it reminded me how much I liked it. And it made me more aware of the fact that this might be the job I want to do. And it impacted the way I even thought of cybersecurity in general because I took a class for cybersecurity at the beginning of my college career, I guess you can say. And I thought it was so hard. I thought it was, you know, the worst thing ever. And that's why I chose software development. But the more I read about cybersecurity, the more I was like, man, maybe I did mess up. Because I would love to do computer forensics. Chapter 4. Chapter 4 was a lot of information. And I mean a lot. It had to do a lot with privacy, it had to do a lot with certain acts, certain um, laws. At one point it touches on the Fourth Amendment. So it was a lot. I mean, there's a lot of information in chapter 4. But what I held on to the most, and I think it's because I am a mom, was the Children's Online Privacy Protection Act. I allow my child to play on her tablet and or the phone. So I never gave it a lot of thought about what sites and stuff she was using. And this chapter opened my eyes to it. Like, it made me realize that my child could be impacted by the technology I'm letting her use. I never thought of it as a way for her to be tracked or as a way for them to gain our information. I just thought of it as, she's learning on it. She's playing this game and she's learning her numbers and she's learning her ABCs. So this one really scared me at first. And, as you read, you know that it was passed in 1998. And, it gives you a peace of mind that it is in the laws and, it is a thing. But then as you read, you learn that in 2016, there were a few companies that they got in trouble for outsourcing to a third. It's like a third. Where did it go? Outsourced to a third party. And they got in trouble for it because you have no idea what that third party is collecting. So even though that the law exists and it gave me a peace of mind, it does still scare me that they are still letting third parties access to everything. So chapter 5. Chapter 5, I don't want to say was a hard chapter to read, but at the same time it wasn't the easiest chapter to read. And I think that's because it touches on a lot of things that you hear about today. So chapter 5 is all about freedom of expression. You learn about censorship, you learn about hate speech, you learn about fake news, you learn about what defamation means, everything. Excuse me. So, obviously, I chose the 3 basic ones that you hear about today, which is censorship, hate speech, and fake news. These ones stuck with me because, let's start with censorship. When you hear about censorship, everybody talks about China. The book, even in this chapter, they talk a lot about China. But nobody really mentions America and how on how bad we censor or if we censor. And it's such a great topic because everyone's like, oh, we don't censor because of freedom of speech. And I get that. But as I read this chapter, it still made me question, are we closer to censorship like China than we think? And it's just nobody will talk about it. Or are we really allowed to do anything and say anything that we want? So this one impacted the way I thought on this subject because, it makes you just question everything about censorship. I mean, it really does. The next one is hate speech. In the last few years, hate speech has blown up. You can't say anything without someone saying it's hate speech. So this one I really liked to read what hate speech was, how it's defined, what it means. And I liked it impacted that how I think because now I can go back and I can be like, hey, I learned about hate speech. I know what it means. I I understand it. Fake news is huge too because fake news became big in like 2016 when the president campaign happened and everything was fake news and everybody was like, "Oh, fake news is this, fake news is that." I honestly had no idea what fake news actually meant for a very long time. You heard so many people saying how Fox News was fake news, how CBS was fake news, how uh basically anything they did not agree with was fake news. So to be able to read what fake news really was in this chapter, uh it made me grateful because now I know what it means. Now I can now I'm educated on it. And I like that because I didn't have to just listen to someone talk and take their opinion of what fake news was and then tell people that that was my opinion. And I'm very grateful that I can now say, hey, I studied this in class. This is what it means. So, the sources I used, I mainly used the book. I didn't really dive deep into any of the chapters or deeper than what the chapter touched on because I learned everything from the book. That's why it impacted me is because I learned it first from the book. Thank you for watching.